Privilege of the floor, sir.
Granted.
I'll try to be very timely, Mr. President. It's something really important to me is happening today. And everybody, I want to introduce you to my son, George Case. And George is named for his grandfather and my brother, both of which have passed, and I wear my father's ties. I'm very proud of this young man. He grew up crawling around the floor in the balcony in the house, and he was, his whole nourishment for the first years of his life were candy from the Wyoming Automobile Dealers Association and other things, and he learned about the Capitol Club and how you could mooch there, and we have lots of great pictures, and the press used to love to take pictures of him when he was tiny and crawling around. It was before we had the glass, and everybody thought he was gonna jump off or something, but he had toys the lobbyists would give him and everything, and all these years he's grown up, and he now is the reason I can be here, because he runs our business, and without that, I couldn't possibly serve, and he does a better job than I ever did. And George Case is not only the son I'm very proud of, you guys, but he's my best friend now. And I never thought that was gonna happen for all the years when we were growing up, and his mom and I separated, but we're still involved in business together, and we're very close. And I just didn't think it would come to this point. And a lot of it had to do with this young man who I'm very proud of. And so will you give him your courtesies today and welcome him? And I thank you all.
Senate File 63, oh, excuse me, I'll lay that back. Senate File 68, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 68, Tangible Personal Property Tax Exemption, sponsored by Senator McEwen.
Senator McEwen.
Morning, Mr. President. It's a pretty simple bill. We're looking at how we're taking personal property taxes and trying to find some exemptions. I'd like to point out that in the Revenue Committee, we did not bring any tax relief bills forward. We were kind of at a 7-7 quandary the whole time. Maybe this needs some tweaking, but basically the premise is we're going to give some relief to personal tangible property. It's actually tax relief. So I would ask everybody to seriously consider giving it a chance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Chief Clerk will, excuse me. Move the bill. Oh.
Microphone?
Thank you. Senator McEwen.
So I move Senate File 0068 and ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bite. I'm sorry I didn't get turned on. I appreciate the catch. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate File 68. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Garou? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott, excuse. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz?
Excused.
Excused. Kinski?
Excused.
Excused. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 68, 25 aye, 3 no, 3 excused.
Senate File 68, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 68 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 107, introductory vote.
Senate File 107, e-cigarette and vapor material directory, sponsored by Senator Landon.
Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. I would move Senate File 107, introduction, and ask for your favorable vote. Senators, we've got a lot of work to do today, so I won't spend a lot of time on this bill. I would say this, I think it's one of the more important bills that you will look at this year. We came across this as we began to look at what kinds of products were being sold in our hemp stores out across the state. And anecdotally, it came to us that, what we really ought to get a handle on is what's going on in our vape stores. And just to put it succinctly, Senators, we've got product that is sneaking in across the borders and getting around customs, coming out of places like China, and it's ending up on the shelves here in Wyoming. We don't know what's in these cartridges. We don't know what our constituents are buying, and our small business owners need what this bill is going to do, which is to set up a registry. It will be paid for by the manufacturers, and all that's going to do is to help us understand and to sanction what products are coming out and ending up in our stores. Anecdotally, Mr. President, we've heard about, particularly up in the northwest part of the state, we've had some of our young people end up in the hospital with this. It's time that we begin to get a handle on this, and I think this is a good bill. Currently, this is a bill and an issue that's going on in at least 20 other states right now. So, we've got a problem. We all know we've got a problem on the border. We know we've got a problem with these products that are coming out of places like China. This is a chance for us to begin to get a handle on it. I hope you'll support Senate File 107. Thank you.
Thank you. Roll call.
Introduction, Senate File 107. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Garou? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Excused. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott excused. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 107, 28 aye, 1 no, 2 excused.
Senate File 107, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, is assigned to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 110, first reading, introduction vote, excuse me. Senator French.
Privilege of the floor, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Quickly, right up here is a couple of my neighbors, farmers, Corey Foreman and Brian Asher, and they're very involved in Farm Bureau. So if you'd all give them a big hand, please.
Senate File 110, introductory vote. Did you read it? I don't think you read it yet.
Senate File 110, School Finance Cash Reserve, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate File 110, School Finance Cash Reserves, and ask for your favorable support. Folks, talking with the school districts, especially out in the Southwest, several of them, they use a spokesman to come to me and they said, why can't we have a little more control over our own destiny locally? So with that, I'm bringing you the bill that eliminates the sunset date for an increase in school district operating balances and cash reserves. These smaller districts, senators, struggle with the monthly cash flow and have to borrow from the state and repay back on a yearly basis. This is a fiscally responsible decision to allow the districts to be more efficient with their long-term budgeting and planning to potentially use the funds to what I call is control their own destiny. They can be fiscally responsible. Payroll challenges at the end of the fiscal year are a problem as well. Most districts distribute their payroll over a 12-month period rather than a 9-month school year. That's a cash flow problem, while all other state entities do not have this same constriction and problem. This allows, you recall a couple of years ago, we got kind of pushed back against the goal line. Folks from other parts of the building were waiting for us to punt, and it was kind of a no deal situation. And at that time I was in leadership and I said, no deal. I was tired of the spending. I think this helps address their needs at the local level of the districts. We eliminate that sunset date and allow them to take care of their own operating balances and cash reserves. We just take away the sunset date. I have confidence this will help them run a better educational show across our state, and ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dockstader. We're on introduction vote for Senate File 110. Before we get to that, Senator Bouchard for privilege of the floor. You may. One moment. Gotcha.
Well, hey, I want to tell you about a little town called Carpenter, because it's a really nice town. It's in my district. There's a bunch of school kids up here from that district. It's where my daughter went to school when she was little. And I just want you guys to realize this, the bill we're talking about now, the reason we come down here for kids like this. And it's why we do this, right? It's for kids just like this up here. I want you to welcome the Carpenter School District, 4th and 5th grade, and the teachers, Lisa Rude. And let's give them a big hand.
Welcome. All right, vote on introduction for Senate File 110. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate File 110. Anderson? No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstader? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Garou? Aye. Hicks? No. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Kinski, aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Vote. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss?
No.
No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. French, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 110, 23 aye, 8 no.
Having received the approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 110 has been introduced and shall be assigned to Committee Number 4, Education. Next Senate file for consideration is Senate File 111. Who will be introducing Senate File, well, excuse me, the reading clerk will read the Senate file.
Senate File 111, Mule and Whitetail Deer Separate Hunting Season, sponsored by Senator Driscoll.
Thank you. You've heard the reading of the Senate file. Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fellow senators, I move for adoption and your favorable consideration on Senate File 111. This is a fairly simple bill. It's fairly lengthy, and it's lengthy because it goes into statutes. When Wyoming was formed and did their original statutes, we basically didn't have whitetails here in the state of Wyoming, so we just referred to deer. And so they went through the statutes, and in different areas of the state, they've separated them, but in the area I live in, which is Region A and a few others, they put mule deer and whitetail together. And as we look to try to manage these game herds, they've kind of managed by blindness. They set herd objectives, and then they let a guy buy a license, and they get to shoot whatever deer they want. And unfortunately, the last couple of years, we've lost huge numbers of our whitetail deer, the EHD and blue tongue. And what it's led to is extreme pressure on our mule deer herd, which everyone on this floor knows how much trouble we've had with mule deer retention and trying to get them to grow around the state. And I had a real reluctance out of the department to look at splitting those apart because of management financial concerns. And so when we went to the Wildlife Task Force, that became one of the issues they wanted to do, and it didn't end up getting out as a bill for them. And interestingly enough, the first time I tried to do this, a lot of the outfitting industry said it's going to cost us a lot of money and hurt us. And now they've come to us and said, these guys are switching when they can't kill a whitetail buck, they're killing a mule deer buck, and we're killing out the last of our good end of our herds. And I haven't seen any real movement. So my belief is whitetail and mule deer are as far apart species-wise as mule deer and antelope are almost, and we do not lump any of those other species together. And so we're compelling the department to actually manage these herds under the North American model, manage them correctly and in a good way. And let's try to build our game herds, be it whitetail, mule deer, or otherwise, to objectives we've done. And I ask for your favorable consideration and help on this bill to help get our wildlife populations back to acceptable levels. Thank you.
Thank you, President Driscoll. All right, we're on first reading of Senate File 111. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introduction, Senate File 111. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 111, 31I.
Senate File 111, having received the required. Senate File 111, having received the required approval of two-thirds of the elected members. Senate File 111 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. Senate File 112, introductory reading.
Senate File 110, I beg your pardon, Senate File 112, Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act 2, sponsored by Senator Boner.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was prepared to give a speech about the importance of voting for this bill on introduction, so we have a vehicle to talk about this very important topic. It would seem that may not be necessary anymore, so I'd ask that this be laid back one day without objection.
Without objection, so ordered. Senate File 113, introduction, reading.
Senate File 113, light and high-profile vehicle closures, sponsored by Senator Pappas.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate File 113 actually is, I need to move the bill. So I ask you, I move Senate File 113, I move for introduction, Senate File 113, light and high-profile vehicle closures 2. Thank you. This piece of legislation was actually the work of your Inter and Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs Committee. However, it didn't make the cut down the hall, but it's a very, very important piece of legislation for keeping our highways open. What's happened, we've seen an increasing amount of closures along our interstates due to the failure of drivers to heed the warning signs on the highways for light and high-profile vehicles. We do have on the books a penalty of $750 for failing to observe these signs. What this bill will do is increase that penalty for failing to adhere to the high profile and light vehicle signs to $2,500. In addition to that, it makes the driver responsible, because many times the fine is paid by the companies, but it makes the drivers actually responsible now. And it also will go on and allow a mandatory revocation of the license if there's 2 or more times under the statute. There's been previous convictions. And it also allows for a mandatory suspension of license if this is actually, if they were convicted in another jurisdiction other than Wyoming. So very important for WYDOT to keep these highways open. I believe that it's good for commerce, and ask for your favorable consideration.
Roll call.
Introductory vote, Senate File 113, Anderson. Aye. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. No. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. No. Brennan. Aye. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. No. Jones. Aye. Kinski. Aye. Cole. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. No. McEwen. McEwen, no. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas.
Aye.
Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. No. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. No. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 113, 24 aye, 7 no.
Senate File 113, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 113 is referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation. Senate File 114, introduction.
Senate File 114, Contractor Licenses, Reciprocal Recognition Requirements, sponsored by Senator Rothfuss.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, before I introduce this, may I have a brief privilege of the floor? Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I see above you in the balcony some bright, beautiful, dynamic faces from the Laramie Montessori Charter School. If they can all stand up, I would love it for the Senate to welcome those wonderful children here today. All right. And Mr. President, with that, I would move Senate File 114 for introduction, contractor licenses, reciprocal recognition requirements. Ask the body's favorable consideration. Mr. President, this is a very straightforward bill that I'm surprised hasn't been passed long ago. I'd ask for the body to give some thought to this. And what this does is allow for reciprocity for contractors that are licensed with one government entity, that could be a municipality, a county, or another government entity, so that they may operate elsewhere in the state of Wyoming. It's a simple, straightforward reciprocity agreement to ensure that there's less bureaucracy, less paperwork, and people can do their work, their hard work, rather than just spend time on paperwork and paying fees. The core of the bill is on page 2, and this summarizes exactly what it does. Each county, city, town, and other government entity that issues licenses to contractors shall recognize a license issued to a contractor by another county, city, town, or other government entity in Wyoming. This is just reducing the size of bureaucracy, reducing the size of government, and letting people do the work that they've been trained to do. Ask the body for an aye vote.
Mr. President, I hold a Class 1 contractor's license from the city of Lander. It's from the WHAM test. I would be affected by this, and I declare conflict.
Brandon, thank you. Roll call.
Introductory vote, Senate File 114. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Conflict? Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 114, 30 aye, 1 excused.
Senate File 114, having received the request.
Excuse me. 30 aye, 1 conflict.
Thank you. I'm trying to get things done in a timely manner. Senate File 114, having received the required approval of 2/3 of elected members, Senate File 114 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 115, introduction.
Senate File 115, Behavioral Health Redesign Amendments 2, sponsored by Senator Baldwin.
Senator Baldwin. Thank you, Mr. President. I move for introduction of Senate File 115, Behavioral Health Redesign Amendments 2. Fellow Senator, at least 5 members of the Senate will recognize this as being an interim bill committee, which had some unforeseen circumstances down in the other end of the hall and did not pass introduction. It was very close. But I bring this back to you because this is an important bill. This bill is something that we worked on during the interim, which redesigns the redesign, if you will. Inadvertently, when we were doing the redesign, we blocked out some people. We actually restricted the number of people, or restricted some of the people who were already getting services, mental health services, in the community mental health centers, which under the new redesign would not be able to get those. That was not the intent. This revision, or this correction, makes that a fix. For 40 years, these people have been getting the mental health they need. Not to confuse the issue, these are people that have been refusing services. These are people, some of them that have insurance, that have high deductibles. And I'm willing to bet that everybody in here that has insurance has watched their deductibles go higher and higher and higher. Sometimes, as we heard yesterday in one of our committees, that the deductibles and the cost of the insurance are outrageous. Some of these people that are now receiving mental health will be blocked out if we don't do this redesign. It will block out a large number of people. Some of these other people, and some of the primary people, are some of our pregnant ladies and some of those with children will no longer receive care. The consequence of that, Senators, is that if these people can no longer receive care that they're receiving now, have been receiving for 40 years, they may deteriorate further. And I wouldn't want to paint that with too bad of a brush, but the fact is that will end up costing the state much, much more money. This doesn't expand Medicaid, as some may have heard. It doesn't add to the Medicaid rolls at all. It has zero net cost to the state. It doesn't grow the community health centers. It just helps us maintain the level of mental health care through the community mental health centers that we have now, and get those people and keep them in the communities and help make them more productive and help their mental health. And I would ask for your support, Senators. Thank you. Roll call.
Introductory vote, Senate File 115. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. Kinsky? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 115, 26 aye, 5 no.
Senate File 115, having received the required approval of 2/3 elected members, File 115 is referred to committee number 10, Labor. Senate File 117, first reading, introductory reading.
Senate File 117, Education Retention for Reading Failure, sponsored by Senator Scott.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, I move introduction of Senate File 117. Mr. President, this is a major continuation of the ongoing efforts to improve the teaching of reading in our public schools. You'll recall that we were warned by our recalibration consultants that we weren't doing an adequate job in this area, and that too many of our students were not going to be able to participate in the coming high-tech economy because they're not learning how to read adequately in the early grades. This is a continuation of the efforts to try to do something about this. My name is on it, Mr. President, but it's really a joint effort of the Republicans on the Senate Education Committee. We were inspired by a national article that described what some other states were doing and said that might well provide solutions for Wyoming. It does involve eventually, a couple of years down the road, retaining kids that in grade that do not learn how to read adequately, try to get them up to speed, because we're really doing no favors to the kids, sending them forward if they haven't learned adequately. It has some time in it. It's 2 years before we get to that level, so the districts that need to can bring themselves up to date and solve the problems. There's a major focus on working together jointly with the parents, because we think that the best results, Mr. President, come when you have a team of the parents and the school district. So that's a major focus. There is an enforcement mechanism, so it can't be ignored. And I think this will set us on the road toward getting some of these problems solved, and I would urge introduction of the bill.
Thank you. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 117, introduction. Anderson? No. No. Baldwin? No. No. Barlow? Aye. Whitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott?
Aye.
Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote? Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 117, 20 aye, 11 no.
Senate File 117, having received the required approval of Again? Oh, it failed. Oh, 20. My bad. Wow. Okay. My bad. Senate File 117, having failed to receive a 2/3 majority vote, has failed introduction. I was counting on my vote. Senate File 118, introduction.
Senate File 118, the Bighorn and Domestic Sheep Relocation Federal Action, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
Second, well, he's off. Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. President, I move Senate File 118, Bighorn and Domestic Sheep Relocation Federal Action, Senate File 118 for introduction. Mr. President, this is give a brief history of this. Starting in 2000, due to a number of litigations against the National Forest Service, domestic sheep grazing allotments were vacated across the western United States, not in Wyoming. At that time, Governor Geringer, current governor, and the senior senator of the United States formed a working group here in Wyoming to develop a Wyoming plan to address the issue of disease transmission between native sheep to bighorn sheep. That group worked for 4 years and produced what we call the Wyoming Bighorn Domestic Sheep Working Plan. That's worked well for the state of Wyoming. We've remediated and developed an opportunity to resolve all those issues within the state of Wyoming. In 2013, we had similar type of legislation, or 2013, 2015. In 2015, we put into law and codified that plan because it was the only working plan in the western United States to preserve our existing agricultural industries and afford them the protection against third-party litigations based on federal rules and regulations. Fast forward to today. We have a new rule promulgated by the Bureau M that gives great deference to bighorn sheep and exclusion of livestock and livestock AUMs. We have a plan in Wyoming, Mr. President, what the bill does is go in there and provides the same things that are consistent with the plan that what we've done in the past to afford those protections for the number 3 industry in the state of Wyoming, our agriculture industry. At the same time, it allows the potential reintroduction of bighorn sheep in the Sweetwater Rocks. Over 30,000 people applied for sheep permits last year in Wyoming for 160 permits. This is the most iconic, highest demand, big game species we have in the state of Wyoming. Mr. President, our plan works, but we need to afford protection to those permittees and those private land grazers out there that this will not be used as a cudgel or a bludgeon for third-party radical litigants that have no other objective other than to get rid of public land grazing. Mr. President, this bill affords protection to those while allowing Wyoming's plan to potentially move forward with the reintroduction of sheep into the Sweetwater Rocks. Would ask for your favorable consideration.
Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate File 118, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Furphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks.
Aye.
Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinski. Aye. Kolb. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. No. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Case, aye to no. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 118, 29 aye, 2 no.
Senate File 118, having received the prior approval of 2/3 elected members, Senate File 118 is referred to Committee Number 5, Ag. Real quick, Senator Kinski, you have 3 bills in a row coming up. Would you like a split between them or do them back to back?
Split would be great.
Okay, I wanted to ask, because I'm going to, with indulgence of the body, I'm going to move a bill up and then down so that I don't force Senator Kinski to do 3 in a row. So Senate File 121, introductory reading. Sorry, Ellen.
Senate File 121, Property Tax Homeowners Exemption, sponsored by Senator Kinski.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move introduction of Senate File 121 and ask for your favorable consideration. We have quite a few property tax bills. At some point, we've got to narrow it down and focus. I do think this is one option you're going to want to have on the table. This is a very simple bill. There's an existing statute that creates a homeowner's exemption or credit that phases out at $62,000 worth of value. This bill simply bumps that up to $300,000. If that number is a little bit too rich for your blood, it can always be, we can always look at a lower number, but the 300 makes effectively 45% of the homes in the state of Wyoming property tax free. It comes at a cost of $160 million per year, $320 per biennium. The virtue of it, though, is it's all existing statute. It's simply amending an amount. The other virtue is the law already provides a backfill. The state doesn't collect property taxes, but towns, counties, commissions, districts do. And as we saw last year, when you start cutting into their revenue, they pick up the phone and call their legislators. we started losing some support. The other thing is, not every county has had a run-up in property tax values. So last year, we had to deal with those counties that were saying, hey, this is just a net cut to us. So I know some don't like the backfill aspect of it, but 77% of the property tax collected is the schools. And by constitution and by law, we have to backfill the schools anytime we reduce their property tax collections. That comes out of the state. So you're talking about 23% backfill to the towns, the locals, and so forth. The other virtue to this bill is it's identical to what passed out of the House last year. So we know we can, I shouldn't have said House, the other chamber. Sorry, Mr. President. And it got down here, and it didn't get down here in time to really get fair consideration. But I think that if we can move it here, we can move it there. It's just another option that I think we want to have on the table as we're looking at our property tax reform bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate File 121, Anderson? No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote? Closing. Vote closed.
Back to the 2019 basis, the bill basically puts a cap on property tax increases of 3% or wage increase, whichever is smaller. So once again, this truly is tax relief. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate File 119, Anderson? No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow?
Aye.
Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen?
Aye.
Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote? Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 119, 27 aye, 4 no.
Senate File 119, having received the required approval of two-thirds elected members, Senate File 119 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 122, Introduction.
Senate File 122, Disposition of Water Rights Amendments, sponsored by Senator Kinski.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate File 122 and ask for your favorable consideration. If we go back 2 years ago, in the 2022 session, almost overwhelmingly, we supported a bill that said what you have to do if you're creating a subdivision outside of the city limits, you now have to do inside the city limits. And what we thought we were doing was that, for instance, if you were annexing a ranch to the city, that you had to find the water rights, you had to document those water rights, and then do something with those water rights. It turns out, the way the bill is written, if you just want to split a lot in two, you have to research the water rights. You have to hire an engineer. You have to go clear back to territorial days very often, because inside the town, these are old water rights. And then you have to file a petition with the board. Your paperwork has to be in 45 days before the board meets. The board meets quarterly. So you're adding, even to a simple development, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, and anywhere from 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer. The easiest and fastest thing to do is the board has said, well, if you just want to abandon your water rights, we'll meet monthly. You still have all the expense, but now what you've encouraged people to do, the easiest, cheapest thing to do is to abandon the water rights. Is that what we want to do with 1890 water rights inside the city? This is, you're just, in our case, you're helping Montana. And what we really need is to repeal this thing and have the board come back with a solution that allows the transfer of these old water rights in a simple, cost-effective manner so that we can preserve these old water rights, not abandon them. I'd ask your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Senator Kinski, I didn't catch on the audio, you moved it, you actually, I thought you did, but
I
could you
did,
move it
yeah.
again, please?
Okay, I move Senate File 122 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you, sorry. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate File 122, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. No. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. No. Murphy. Aye. Baru. No. Hicks.
No.
No. Hutchings. No. Ide. No. Jones. Aye. Kinski.
Aye.
Aye. Cole. No. Landon. Aye. Larson. No. Kuhn. No. Nethercott. No. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. No. Salazar. No. Schuler. No. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
No, excuse me.
President Driscoll, no. Hutchings, no to aye. Anderson, aye to no. Cooper, aye to no. Landon, aye to no. Cole. Cole, no to aye. Schuler, I misunderstood, I apologize. That's an aye. Hicks?
No to aye.
Hicks, no to aye. Ellis, aye to no. Cole? Aye, no to aye. Closing vote. Murphy? To no. Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 122, 17 aye, 14 no.
Senate File 122, having failed to receive the 2/3 majority vote, has failed introduction. Senator Nethercott, are you prepared to present? I'll move you in between. Sorry, Ellen, I'm bouncing you all over.
That's okay.
Senate File 63, introduction.
Senate File 63, Property Tax Exemption, Residential Structures 2, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for introduction of Senate File 63, Property Tax Exemption Residential Structures 2. Good senators, this is another tool in the toolbox for this legislative session to understand how we can get our arms around property tax solutions for the people of Wyoming. What this bill does, it It allows for an immediate property tax solution that can go into effect in 2024 that is compatible with the assessor's current computer software system. So very important to understand some of those logistical challenges on the ground with some of these tax reform measures and understanding how quickly they can actually deploy to the people. So kind of big picture solution there that I think is important. So what the bill does is it puts a cap on the maximum amount that taxes can increase in a given year, and that cap is 5%. And so that is the solution. Again, it's one of the property tax solutions that doesn't require a constitutional amendment, can provides what I think is the fastest solution to the people of Wyoming without a constitutional amendment, and working with the software we have on the ground for our county assessors, and provides, I think, a meaningful property tax reduction for the people of Wyoming without harming our cities, towns, counties, and schools. So with that, I would ask for your favorable consideration of Senate File 63.
Chief Clerk, call the roll.
Senate File 63, introductory vote. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case?
No.
No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott?
Aye.
Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 63, 30 aye, 1 no.
Senate File 63, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 63 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 123, introduction.
Senate File 123, binder name changes, sponsored by Senator Kinski.
Senator Kinski.
I'm glad for the 3-bill limit saved me from myself. Appreciate it. Mr. President, I move introduction to Senate File 123 and ask for your favorable consideration. This is a very good friend of mine. They have 2 children. They had given the children a middle name of a family member. They since have changed their minds and want to reverse that. So they filed a name change petition, and the statute says that you have to publish in the newspaper unless you can show good cause otherwise. She said, this is not like where we've got a divorce and you know, somebody's trying to change the kid's name without the other parent's permission. It's the mom and the dad of the kid. She says, I don't understand why we have to run an ad. I don't want to pay for an ad. And for privacy reasons, I'd rather not run an ad in the newspaper. And it really doesn't make sense because you can run the ad in the newspaper and somebody shows up. They have no standing to object to a name change because it's the natural mom and the natural dad have the whole say in it. So this bill simply says if you're the parents of the kid and you want to change the name, and there's not anybody else that has any interest, like an ex-husband, that, you know, that's the natural father of the children, you don't have to advertise. It's a simple little bill. I'd appreciate your favorable consideration.
Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate File 123. Anderson? No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Docksteder? Conflict? Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks?
Aye.
Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski?
Aye.
Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 123, 28 aye, 2 no, 1 conflict.
Senate File 123, having received the required approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate File 123 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 4, or Senate Joint Resolution Number 4, Introduction.
Senate Joint Resolution 4, Convention of States 2, a joint resolution requesting Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments to the United States Constitution as specified, sponsored by Senator Brennan.
Senator Brennan.
Thank you. I move for introduction, Senate Joint Resolution 4, and would ask for your favorable vote for this resolution. Ladies and gentlemen, this resolution is one that is familiar to all of us. It is a resolution using Article 5 to call a convention of the states. This convention would convene for the purposes of discussing amendments to the Constitution for the limited purposes of imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limiting the term of office for federal officials and for federal officials in Congress. We have all seen how the federal debt is out of control. The federal government has usurped its powers over the states. We daily experience the threats of the federal government in Wyoming with our lands and the war on coal and oil. It's time we stood up to the federal government. As a little girl, I fell in love with the American history and US government as my favorite subject. Our country is an amazing place with an incredible structure of checks and balances. However, as I have grown up, it has become clear that there is one place where we have not yet used the wisdom and the mechanisms of checks and balances given to us by our forefathers to the fullest. This lies within the state's ability to keep the federal government in check. We know that our founding fathers intended for the federal government to derive its powers from the states, not the other way around. It's time that Wyoming courageously join the other states that have passed this resolution and take back the powers that the federal government has stolen from us. I'm no longer a little girl. I'm a mother of 4 young children. I don't want debt of the federal government to be bigger or an enhanced bureaucracy for my children. Today is the day to stop accepting the status quo because of fears of what could happen. It's time for us to courageously stand up and vote on behalf of the future generations. I would ask for your favorable I vote.
Thank you. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate Joint Resolution 4. Anderson? No. No. Baldwin? No. No. Barlow? Aye. Aye. Beitman? Aye. Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Brennan?
Aye.
Aye. Case? Aye. Aye. Cooper? Aye. Docksteder? No. Ellis? No. No. French? Aye. Furphy? No. No. Guru? No. No. Hicks? Aye. Aye. Hutchings? No. No. Ide? No. No. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott?
No.
No. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate Joint Resolution Number 4, 17 aye, 14 no.
Senate Joint Resolution 4, having failed to receive a 2/3 majority vote, has failed introduction. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I have the privilege of the floor?
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the balcony, we now have some middle school students from the Snowy Range Academy over in Laramie, Wyoming. I'd like them to stand up if we can. These are exceptional students that we're welcoming here. I'd like to have you over here and watch us do our business on behalf of the state of Wyoming. And I'd like the Senate to welcome these incredible students from Snowy Range Academy. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. Senate Joint Resolution 5, introduction.
Senate Joint Resolution 5, School Capital Construction Constitutional Amendment, a joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution to transfer responsibility to construct school facilities to school districts by providing mandatory and optional state funding mechanisms and to provide a ballot statement. Sponsored by Senator Scott.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, move for introduction of Senate Joint Resolution number 5. Mr. President, this deals with school capital construction. Our current system really is not going to work any longer. It was predicated on having a revenue source that was very good for us at the time, which was the coal lease bonus money. Those monies are gone. We're not going to get them anymore. As a practical matter, we've got to do something differently. What this resolution says is, and it has to be a constitutional amendment because we're dealing with the Campbell Court decisions, Wyoming Supreme Court decisions. This says we'll go back to a bond issue system where local school capital construction is voted on by local voters whose property taxes will go up if the bond issue passes. I think that gets us sound decisions. Mr. President, it does have an equalization feature in it that I think eliminates the problems that led to the Supreme Court decision. And that equalization feature, I think, is essential. And Mr. President, this is an old friend, a slightly earlier version passed the Senate. I forget how many years ago, 3-4 years ago, Mr. President. This puts this on the table as we consider going forward. What are we going to do about school capital construction?
Thank you, Senator Scott. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Introductory vote, Senate Joint Resolution 5. Anderson? No. No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? No. Beitman? Aye. Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Aye. Brennan? Aye. Aye. Case? Aye. Aye. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Aye. Ellis? Aye. Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Kinski? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott?
Aye.
Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate Joint Resolution 5, 22 aye, 9 no.
Senate Joint Resolution 5, having received the approval of 2/3 of the elected members, Senate Joint Resolution 5 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. That clears the introduction. There has been, the totals came out at 132 Senate files plus 5 resolutions for 137. House had 221 plus 8 resolutions, total of 229. Comes up with 366 bills will come through the legislature in some form this year. And we did 610 drafts, so not quite, almost 2 to 1 on the drafts we had done, so. Reports from standing committees.
February 15, 2024, Mr. President, your Committee Number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 18, Indian Child Welfare Act Safe Haven Amendments, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Jones, and Schuler. Excused, Senator Guru. Senator Schuler, Chairman. February 15, 2024, Mr. President, your Committee Number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 37, Indian Child Welfare Act Delinquency Amendments, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Jones, and Schuler. Excused, Senator Guru. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Bills on second reading. Senate File 4, second reading, the second.
Senate File 4, Rehiring Retired Firefighters, Continued Retirement Benefits.
Senate File 4 have been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 8, second reading, the second. Senate File.
Senate File 8, Health Insurance for Volunteer Emergency Responders, sponsored by the Labor Committee.
Senate File 8, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 15, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 15, Acceptance of Retrocession Federal Military Installations.
Senate File 15 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no, excuse me, Senator Pappas. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, there was a question on introduction regarding the other locations that are specified in the bill. So I just wanted to report back on the findings that were given to me by the military department. So the question was Fort Washakie. Fort Washakie appears to now be the headquarters of the offices of the United States Indian Services on the Wind Reservation. So there is federal presence there. Camp Sheridan is now better known as Fort Yellowstone, which serves as headquarters for Yellowstone National Park and is administered by the National Park Service. Camp Butte, from what they could find out, is now owned actually by the Catholic Diocese of Cheyenne. They were unable to determine whether what legal mechanism was used to legitimize the conveyance and how or whether it is actually changed. The original post actually closed in 1899. I guess that's questionable whether it should be in there. And then, of course, F.E. Warren Air Force Base and the Powder Depot, they believe were actually the same location. So again, they think that the Powder Depot was in the current base boundaries. To the extent that the federal government retains any interest in any of these locations is probably a moot point, as it requires both parties to agree on the retrocession. And so don't think it's a big issue if we leave those names in there. but, you know, if, we could pursue removing a couple of them if we needed to. So that's what I found out. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to look. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. And, I think maybe this is, if we want to do cleanup, that'd be a good topic for revisor's bill. I think that'd be my suggestion. And as far as, I think one of the properties, we don't know how it got conveyed to a non-government entity, but I'd point out that that does happen, not all the time, but we had a missile squadron north of town that has been decommissioned. The properties reverted either back to the original landowner, or there was a time, a year or two ago, you could go on a website associated with the government services for the federal government and buy an old, the land at least, for an old missile silo. So they do have a process for getting rid of property, and it seems like this is happening in all these very, very old, 130, 120-year-old references. So, like I said, I think a good topic for a revisor's bill.
Senate File 15, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate File 17, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 17, Plane Coordinate System Amendments.
Senate File 17, having been read 2 separate times, Senator Boner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I was able to do a little bit more digging on some of the good questions our colleagues had. And and looked at, first of all, it's done my appreciation for members of TRW who had to deal with this a year or two ago. Apparently, it was an extraordinary situation. And so the work that you see here is a product primarily of the work that they did. So I want to thank them sincerely. It did make a difference. And we did address some of the concerns that were laid out in that also memo from 2 years ago. This is not the same bill. We'll leave it at that. And the bill that we have now is building off of some of those discussions that I had. So I'd like to thank all my colleagues from TRW who worked on this so hard. It made a difference. So thank you.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think after reviewing the question from yesterday, the comment and opinion from the LSO is irrelevant. If you look at the beginning of this bill title, that language that they referenced in the LSO's letter is not existent in the bill title of this current bill in front of you today. Basically, the original one did have relating to the administration of government requiring the Department of Enterprise Technology Services to promulgate rules for the use of the Wyoming plane coordinate system. Now that part's really been stricken from the bill title. So as I see it and understand it, the reference from the LSO no longer is relevant because what was commented upon is no longer in this bill as in front of you. So I think that's what I've come up with. I hope that's somewhat of an explanation to the good work that was done in TRW in the past. I think it's just not the same bill. To answer the question about why there may be a legal issue, there doesn't seem to be one. So thank you, Mr. President.
Senate File 17, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 21, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 21, Public Utilities Net Power Cost Sharing Ratio, sponsored by the Corporations Committee.
Senate File 21, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 30, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 30, Influencing Jurors and Witnesses, Judges Amendment.
Senate File 30, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 35, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 35, Public Records DOC Investigation.
Senate File 35, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 55, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 55, Board of Equalization, questions before the board.
Senate File 55 have been read 2 separate times. Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
Mr. President, I do have a consent list. The consent list is as follows. Senate File 2, Legislative Budget. Senate File 12, Meat Processing, Plant Hides and Carcasses. Senate File 14, State Fair Board Powers and Responsibilities. Senate File 20, Electricity Rates for Costs that do not benefit Wyoming. Senate File 47, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions. Senate File 48, Patrol Warden and Investigator Retirement Contributions. Senate File 49, Judicial Retirement Programs Contributions. Senate File 58, Investment of State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. Senate File 59, Federal Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustments. Senate File 67, Public Employees Retirement Plan Contributions.
Would anybody like any bills removed from the consent list? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would ask that Senate File 47, Senate File 48, and Senate File 49 be removed from the consent list.
Without objection, so ordered. Senator Larson.
Yes, Mr. President, I move Senate File 2 be laid back.
Senator Rothfuss.
I would encourage the good senator to just ask that it be laid back.
Mr. President, I ask to move Senate File 2 back, laid back.
Senator Larson, the correct procedure is to remove it from the consent list, and then you'll be able to stand up and lay it back then.
Mr. President, I move that this be taken off the consent list.
Thank you. Without objection, so ordered. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that Senate File 12 and Senate File 14 be removed from the consent list.
Without objection, so ordered. Okay, little executive decision here. We're going to dispose of the consent list and start through third reading. But there's only 4. We got her. Send me the start. We'll start at the top now. Senate File 2, third reading.
Senate File 2, Legislative Budget, sponsored by the Management Council, an act relating to appropriations for the legislature.
Senator Larson.
Mr. President, I'll try again. I ask that Senate File 2 be laid back.
Well done. Without objection, so ordered. Senate File 12, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 12, Meat Processing Plants, Hides and Carcasses, an act relating to hides and carcasses sponsored by the Agriculture Committee.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, on Tuesday, the 13th of this week, 13th of February, I brought my concern to this body regarding the composition of our committee that brought this forward, the Ag Committee, being composed of 7 members instead of the rule appropriate 6 members instead of the rule appropriate 5 members. So while I am not making any comment, nor will I vote based on the comment on the content of this bill, I am going to vote no on this and the succeeding bill because I do not think they're being considered in a manner that's consistent with the Senate rules. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Comments? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 12. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow?
No.
No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen?
Aye.
Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
No.
No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 12, 17 aye, 14 no.
Senate File 12, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 12, meat processing plants, hides, and carcasses, has passed the Senate. Senate File 14, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 14, State Fair Board Powers and Responsibilities, an act relating to agriculture, livestock, and other animals, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee.
Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 14, third reading roll call. Anderson? No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 14, 18 aye, 13 no.
Senate File 14, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members. What does the vote count?
18, 13, Mr. President.
18 aye.
Yes.
All right, I thought I'd messed up again. All right. Having received the affirmative vote of majority members elected to the Senate, Senate File 14, State Fair Board Powers and Responsibilities, has passed the Senate. Senate File 20, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 20, Electricity Rates for Costs That Do Not Benefit Wyoming, an act relating to public utilities, sponsored by the Corporations Committee.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the Senate File 20, Electricity Rates for Costs That Do Not Benefit Wyoming, pass the Senate? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 20, Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 20, 31 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 20, electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming, has passed the Senate. Senate File 47, third reading of Senate File.
Senate File 47, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions, an act relating to compensation and benefits, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 47, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions, pass the Senate? The Chief Clerk will call the roll. Excuse me, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against Senate File 47. Mr. President, I applaud and understand the good work of the Appropriations Committee on this topic during the interim and trying to address and remedy the long-term actuarial soundness of these funds. Obviously, we need to protect those funds because we made an agreement. We made an agreement with those employees of the state of Wyoming that if they came and worked for the state of Wyoming, that we would uphold our end, we would maintain our state integrity, we'd be honest with them, and we would protect those retirement benefits that they're agreeing to accept in service of the state of Wyoming, right? That's what these people are doing. They're serving and protecting our public. That's what they're doing, and that's what they agree to do. They don't get incredible salaries. They don't get that chance of a home run. They do it because they're dedicated to their community, and they're dedicated to the people of the state of Wyoming. So that's our side of the deal, is to make sure that they have those assets protected, and that's what the Appropriations Committee went to work on. The challenge, Mr. President, with the way this bill is laid out is the fact that it takes money out of their pocket to protect the integrity and actuarial soundness of the retirement fund. So, for example, a law enforcement officer under this plan that made $75,000 a year would have a little over $1,800 taken out of their pocket. Money that they were expecting, money that they earned, that we're taking back from them, clawing back, Mr. President, because we, this body, not just today, but historically, has done an inadequate job from our side of the service to protect the integrity of those funds. Now, we can talk about the fact that it's an investment. We can put clever and beautiful words around the idea that, well, this is for them in the long run. They're earning it. They get to keep this money. It'll go into an account. That's them, theirs in the future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can build all the words we want, but those words don't matter at the end of the day. What really matters is how much money do they take home that they can expend on their families, on their needs, on their food, vehicles, their homes, paying towards our property tax. What do they have available to them? And at the end of the day, if this bill passes, we will be taking $1,800 from them to put into the retirement fund because we didn't do a good enough job of setting it up in the first place. And I can't support that. If we had supported the concept of just picking it all up as the state, I'd be on and for this bill. The long-term policy viability, it's important. We need to find ways to fund and protect it for the same reasons I just said. But this bill is not the solution. This bill penalizes them for their service, takes money out of their pockets, and goes against our side of this honest deal that we made with them, Mr. President. Vote against this bill.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder, folks, this fund is on a downward trajectory. And the way these retirement funds work, the sooner you nip the problem in the bud, it costs less to bail it out than what it's going to cost later. This is a 2.5% contribution from the state, 2.5% from the employee. When we're all done, the rate of contribution to this pension for every dollar of payroll will be 22.2%. The employees are being asked to pay 2.5% of that 22.2%. The state is picking up 88.7% of the cost of this pension. I'd urge your affirmative vote. This is good for the employees. It's right for the state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 47, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions, pass the Senate? The Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 47, roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? No. Whitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Jones? Aye. Kinski?
Aye.
Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
No.
No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 47, 22 aye, 9 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 47, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions, has passed the Senate. Senate File 48, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 48, Patrol, Warden, and Investigator Retirement Contributions, an act relating to compensation and benefits, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. And on this legislation, the same analysis. We will be taking money away from these hardworking game wardens, patrollers, and other officers of the state of Wyoming, DCI, folks that once again are working on behalf of the hardworking people of the state of Wyoming. We're not living up to our side of it, and we're taking money out of their pockets because we couldn't make the right choices. Vote no on 48.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good senators, we did hear from representatives from these agencies, and they have no objection. And they understand the need to ensure that their retirement fund is sound and that they can make long-term plans for their families with a solid and stable retirement. So we did hear direct testimony from the patrol, the wardens, and DCI about the fact that they have no objection and look forward to continuing to work with the Appropriations Committee on ensuring the soundness of their retirement funds.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the bill. I think it's a misnomer to say that someone's getting a loss when they're getting a long-term benefit. I think it's a fact that I learned my lesson on Fire Plan A and what happens when things aren't funded correctly. This is a benefit to them directly. And yes, it costs a little bit more money, and other people are kicking in a lot more money. So I'm on and for the bill.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, on and for the bill. However, I do agree with the senator from the Laramie River area that we should be funding some of this, but we didn't get that passed in the previous meeting. So on and for this, this will make that system whole, and we won't have a bigger contribution in the future that we need to do. So on and for this bill.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 48, Patrol, Warden, and Investigator Retirement Contributions pass the Senate? The Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 48. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. McEwen, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 48, 24 aye, 7 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected. Thank you. Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 48, Patrol, Warden, and Investigator Retirement Contributions has passed the Senate. Senate File 49, third reading.
Senate File 49, Judicial Retirement Program Contributions, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to compensation and benefits.
Thank you, Mr. President. And briefly, this is the same arguments as previous, but now we're talking about the judicial branch. We know that we actually had requests because there were struggles and challenges with the judicial branch to be achieving market salary, and those have been effectively rejected. So at this point in time, they're under market, and we are, again, going to take money, additional money out of their pockets, and clearly, it's for good actuarial soundness, but we're taking money out of their pockets. I can't imagine they're going along with this happily, and I guess I'd challenge everybody in the chamber, all senators here, to just think through how supportive you would be of a policy that directly takes $2,000 out of your pocket when we've been fighting like crazy on the tax side of things for families that are struggling to pay $1,000 or $2,000 out of their pockets for property tax. I guess I struggle to believe that they're welcoming this decision. It does help to sustain the long-term viability, but we have a choice as a state to pick that up ourselves. And Mr. President, make no mistake about it, if we don't pass this bill, the fund will not collapse. We can come back next year and do it right. That's no problem. We're projecting 30 years out and shifting from 85%-ish viable to 100% viable. We clearly have time to get this right. Let's not do it by taking money out of the pockets of our judges that sacrifice a tremendous amount of their time and energy on behalf of the people of the state of Wyoming. This takes money from them to fix our mistakes.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good senators, I actually have to agree with the concerns from the ivory tower, although I've disagreed with the other concerns mentioned. And the reason for that is, in 2022, we gave the judges, this body voted for it, an increase in salary compensation, which went into effect then. This body on introduction a couple days ago killed that statutory compensation increase, and so the impact of that, unless it's remedied in the budget bill, is that they will take a decrease in compensation as a result of the failure of that bill on introduction. And so they will be receiving less compensation than they have historically. And so I do think this might be an unfair hit to them as well, in light of the fact they will have to be modifying their monthly take-home as a result of that vote. And then as a result of this vote, they'd have an increase coming out of their monthly compensation for that retirement. This particular retirement fund is more sound than any of the others, and so the need to move more quickly with this is less concerning. So I do think that a no vote on this at this time, as a result of the actions we took in '22, this week, and now with this bill, that in fairness to those public servants who live at our whims, that is likely a fair result to vote no on this bill.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the reasons given by the previous speaker, previous senator, I am also a no vote.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chair, Mr. President, during my tenure here, I don't know the exact years, but it wasn't that long ago that the circuit court judges, the district court judges, the Supreme Court judges received a raise. It was somewhere on the order of $10,000 to $15,000 per year. We turned around 2 to 3 years later, and again, $10,000 to $15,000 per year, fairly substantial raises. They're being asked to go from paying 3.65% to 4%. They're being asked to go from paying 3.65% to 4% of their pension. 85% of the pension cost is picked up by the state of Wyoming. I would urge an affirmative vote on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 49, Judicial Retirement Program Contributions, pass the Senate? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 49, Anderson? No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? No. Whitman? No. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? No. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
No.
No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 49, 16 aye, 15 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 49, Judicial Retirement Program Contributions, has passed the Senate. Senate File 58, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 58, Investment of State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to unemployment compensation funds.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 58, Investment of State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, pass the Senate? The Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 58. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 58, 31 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of a majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 58, Investment of State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, has passed the Senate. Senate File 59, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 59, Federal Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustment, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to unemployment compensation.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 59, Federal Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustment, pass the Senate? The Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 59. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 59, 29 aye, 2 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 59, Federal Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustment, has passed the Senate. Senate File 67, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 67, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to public employee retirement.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 67, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions, pass the Senate? The Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 67. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? No. Beitman? No. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? Conflict? Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll? Aye. Ellis, aye to no. Pappas, aye to no. Landon, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 67, 16 aye, 14 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members excuse me.
I apologize. 16 aye, 14 no, 1 conflict.
Thank you, good catch. Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 67, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions, has passed the Senate. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, you have choices.
Mr. President, I move that we stand recessed until 2 p.m.
Announcements. Senator Biden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 3, Revenue, will meet upon noon recess at, let's say, 12:15 in Capitol Extension Room W6 and online. Take up our only tax bill this session, Senate File 54, Homeowners Tax Exemption.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 10, Senate Labor, Health, and Social Services Committee will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp to hear 4 bills in Capitol Room 6 and online. Bill number 75, SF5, Organ Transplant Recipient Protection. Senate File 6, Nursing Home Administrators Temporary Licenses. Senate File 7, Behavioral Health Redesign, Vulnerable Adults. And Senate File 81, Hospital or Healthcare District Created Entities Immunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee 1, Judiciary, will meet tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m., room W4 down in the extension. To take up the following bills, we'll have 4 of them, Mr. President. Senate File 53, 6th Judicial District, number of judges. Senate File 92, Registered Sex Offender Employment Restrictions. Senate File 31, Sex Offender Registration Promoting Obscenity. And Senate File 34, Sex Offender Registration, Registrable Offenses, again, tomorrow morning, 7:30, Mr. President.
All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. Senate will stand in recess until 2 p.m.